Hello, hello, patriots. Hello, friends. Hello, fellow Americans looking to make this country a better place. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an amazing show planned for you. We have a very special guest. SG Anon joins us today. And I got to tell you something, I've really been looking forward to this for a long time because he just sort of brings the information to us that you're not going to find anywhere else. Honestly, I listened to his files when he publishes them. There's another one that just came out this morning. I can't wait to have not had a chance to listen to it yet, but I will before the end of the day. And it's such a privilege to have him join us today. So Lewis and I have questions for him, and also we have your questions that we're going to pose to him as well. So SG, welcome to the program, my friend. Yes, absolutely a pleasure to have you here. Great. We're going to get started today. I guess, SG, where I'd like to begin, I'll throw out the first question to you. We've been here in Southern California experiencing what a lot of meteorologists are now calling historic weather. They're talking about
the very nature of the atmosphere in a particular area. It's what's called a climate weapon. So the smoke out and the exposure of these very advanced capabilities that exist in the shadow powers that pull the strings of government, as President Putin said to the entire world today with Tucker Carlson, an interview that has been released abroad and is due to be released here in the U.S. if it's not already been so. That sort of evidences itself out in the same fashion, the same vein, right? And so we're talking about this shadow power structure. We're bringing that out into the public fold in a very massive and powerful way. And this is happening coinciding with the same time that people are finally beginning to acknowledge, well, wait a minute, the changes in climate are happening so rapidly and they're happening so fast that they can only be inorganic. And that leads to a number of different conclusions, but almost certainly will lead them to the idea of weather control and the idea of the patented systems that the governments and militaries of the world have owned for a very long time and have used to manipulate us.
We had posted a photograph on the Sunday prior to this happening of the chemtrails and that over here in Southern California. It's for us, we call it chemtrail season. We're seeing quite a bit of that happening, and then now we have this come in. So it kind of leads us to believe that. Do you believe that they have the ability to not only create the weather but also direct it? In other words, this idea that it parked itself over Los Angeles. Is there any connection? Is Los Angeles in play? We heard a lot about California being a place that was going to be attacked.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you can create different weather conditions and modify the atmosphere, and then in particular the content of that atmospheric composition over a large area, you can do essentially anything you want with high level weather systems. And that's what all of the major storm systems that we would reference, like hurricanes, typhoons, tornadic events, things of that nature, they have a high level overarching connection to the broader currents, and they have a clash of high pressure and low pressure. Now, I'm not a meteorologist, just for the record, but I understand that if you have sort of opposing forces that are like having those two magnets that won't go together, right, you create a situation where there is sort of a pinball effect that happens in space and in the air content that is going on. And so if you're able to generate a hurricane and then direct that event through very high level wind currents that you're creating by superheating different component parts of the atmosphere and pulling air up in vast updrafts, which then cool and can be arched over a space, right? A plane up there in the top of the sky. If you can do all of that, then it stands to reason that you can utilize the same technology to create very high pressure areas, very cold upper air systems that would cause something like a tropical weather event or some sort of hurricane or typhoon to act as sort of like a pinball at the hands of the gears and levers that are moving within the machine, right? It bounces off the different component parts. And if you continue that up in a pattern, you can actually isolate that event over a relatively small area. There's a really good a really good case that's been made, but it's been lost, of course, to the annals of the internet and all of the censorship that was discussing the hurricane. I believe it was 1999 Hurricane Mitch over the Central Americas, and the amount of water that it dropped and the amount of flooding and damage that it caused. It hovered over a specific area. I think it was 12 days. Don't quote me. I'd have to go back and research it a little bit closer. But the entire idea of that seemed very odd, and there were cases that were made about this technology even back then, but they were immediately squashed.
Yeah, now we're seeing it in real time. So we're starting to see that it isn't, just theory anymore. Now it is actually reality. They were actually this morning, Lewis, you'll appreciate this. They had sent out, the emergency broadcasts that they're sending to our cell phones. We've been getting them every few hours here for flash flooding. But in San Diego this morning, really
Yeah,
fascinating.
that's not weather manipulation at all. It's all just coincidence, Robert. Do
Yeah.
you need a tinfoil hat when we talk about these things?
I don't really need one, but okay.
So, yeah, it's interesting. SG also is there's two states. Is it Texas and New Hampshire, I believe, that are pushing to try to ban chemtrails. Now, the process to do that, it goes through legislature, and it's all these hurdles that they have to jump through. Why that's important to me is because that means it's being recognized as truth. So it's just
Right.
another conspiracy theory that becomes a conspiracy fact. What do you think about that? And maybe there's an underlying pressure, which I feel there is, to push things in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. I believe that that's occurring, and I think that's a great part of this awakening journey. I make no misrepresentation about the fact that I follow very closely an entity called Q, and I believe very devoutly in that particular idea and that operation. And so, understanding where I'm coming from is actually really crucial for those out there that may be hearing me for the first time. So, in this operation that is this Q awakening movement that occurred online, there are two components that I believe are at play. I believe one of those components is an information and excellent. Love the cup. Launched in October of 2017. But also, I believe that a component of this operation is actually kinetic and very military and very real, and involves Special Operations Command of not only the United States, but a number of different large scale influential militaries around the world who all have a vested interest in dropping the same deep state shadow powers that have gotten control of our government over the last half century and really more, going back 150 years at this point. So the idea of things like chemtrails coming into the public fore in the information space being accepted as fact to the point that now state entities are acting upon this categorically proves their existence, right? But the other thing that it does is it sets it up, I think, in the narrative space to lead to a much greater public outcry for military accountability. Because it is military forces that have been deploying these particular components. And we have to go back and appreciate that a lot of the pilots weren't necessarily read into the contents of the things that they were
Hmm.
dropping out of the aircraft.
True.
A lot of these individuals thought that they so you can appreciate then that a lot of this corruption has to come from very high levels of command and control within the U.S. military, which by its own nature is not that broad and vast, meaning it's a manageable number, I think, to handle. And we have seen sort of an espionage operation happening in the background as well to drive some of these component military forces out into the light. There's a gentleman named Derek Johnson who does a very good job of highlighting that over the last 7 to 8 years, we've seen more than 140 dismissals of command level positions within the United States Armed Services for loss of confidence in the ability to command. But prior to 2014, that entire number going back 4 decades was less than 25. So appreciating then that we're in a situation where there is some sort of transformation of command and control happening within the military, ostensibly to stop these types of activities, we have to also bring the realization and the reality of those activities out into the public fore. We can't have accountability for things that the public still believes don't exist. And some of these activities have been some of the worst criminal actions conducted against the populations of the United States and the world for multiple decades.
Yeah, agree. I'm really glad that you brought up Q because mainly people that have watched this our program for a while, they know I'm pretty hard on the interpreters of Q because I believe a lot of it is done for manipulation. Some of it is done to get their clicks so they can get paid, and I think people just accidentally misinterpreted. Great example. Trust the plan didn't mean sit on our ass and do nothing, in my opinion, but that's what people interpreted it to do. I believe it means we, the people, as President Trump said, get activated, and the plan is multi-fold. It's not just uniform watch the white hats do their work. What's your opinion on the misinterpretations of Q and people using it for, I think, nefarious acts also?
I mean, honestly, I think my interpretations are that there is a tremendous segment of folks out there, both influential and just the ordinary everyday person, that I think have gotten the wrong idea of what Q actually represented and was supposed to be. A Q was never a call to lethargy. If anything, it was a call to action. And there are several direct, you could only call them directives that Q gives, what you would ostensibly term a digital army, right? The individuals on the other side of the screen reading whatever is coming out on the board. And those directives were always something that was actionable and always something that people needed to go and do. They needed to participate. They needed to go down this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole, and then they needed to move into their localities and understand how it applies even down to the county and community level. We were given a grid work, an excellent framework for how we can iron out and isolate all of this corruption down to the community levers of power, but without what Q references, the Mill Civ Alliance, meaning that we, the people, have an important part to play in this great awakening. And if we don't play that, it won't succeed. If we don't do that, then we're never going to get that sort of county control and that local level community government that we're supposed to have and that we all want to have back. So now the journey is getting all of that back under control and rooting out the corruption that Julian Assange says is 98% deep in all governments worldwide. And then it would cringe most people's toes if they understood the true gravity of the types of things that these individuals were doing. So understanding that, I look at that and I think to myself that Q cannot be but an actionable operation. You can't call yourself, I think, a good researcher and not participate to some degree in a broader mission here in the world, because you are the front line. You are the one that has to set the example. Everyone out there that has come along in this awakening journey over the last 36 months, regardless of where they started and regardless of how they ended up, listening to this broadcast or others like it, they have an important part to play in their communities and in their localities, right? Unearthing those corruption, those pockets of corruption within your own communities, taking those skills that you learn from researching the worldwide deep state mafia, the Farnese family, the Medici family, the Orsinis, right? The Colonnas, going all of the way back. And getting very into the true machinations of what's been happening in the shadow power structures of the world, take those skill sets and apply those, even just 15% of that overall skill set and talent, and apply that to your local community. And I promise each of you out there, you will be very surprised at what you find.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing up the local communities because, as we often state here at the Screw Big Gov family, the micro will fix the macro. And we need to spend more attention focusing on the local, and the local will take care of the larger, and so on and so forth. Um, you mentioned something that we talk about also a lot is pretty much the frog in the pot. This is how we got here, is by them slowly boiling us without us knowing. Now, I believe, and this is just my interpretation, and feel free to disagree because I'd love your input on this. I believe that let's call them the good guys, some people call them the white hats, let's call them the good guys, are doing the exact opposite, where they're using the frog in the pot to slowly acclimate us to this information so we can internalize it better and prevent this from happening in the future. What you say on that?
I think in spirit, I would agree with most of that statement. But the only thing that I would add to it is that there is a necessary kinetic component that cannot happen any other way. We cannot provide, a backdrop, for example, for Russia's reclamation of their Ukrainian territory and the purging of the ancient Khazarian stronghold there in that Eurasian Caucasus region. We can't set that backdrop against anything other than the deep state sort of spawning chaos and disorder and unrest off all around the world, right? And indeed, in that process, you have seen a tremendous component of the populations of we the peoples of the world that have realized in a way that perhaps would not have been possible in any other form or fashion or delivery system, the fact that our governments, right down to our community levers of power and right up to our judiciary at the federal and even at the international level, are compromised entities that serve a greater purpose, and that purpose is not friendly to us long term.
Mm-hmm.
within that process, you have the activation of people in a patriotic spirit that I can only describe as being Holy Spirit driven, completely activated by God, because it's across all boundary lines, across all schools of discipline, across all studies, across all academia, all sports arenas, all athletic institutions, even those very large, well-respected national and international events. And from every single arena of the public narrative and of the public fold, you have individuals like Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones, coming together and having real world discussions. You have individuals like Russell Brand who have come out and said that Moderna paid for all of the censorship related to the so we need to go and actually appreciate what that really means. And these messages are being delivered to hundreds of millions of people around the world. So this process, this bonfire, has come off in a way that I don't think would have been achievable if we had seen Trump, invoke some sort of presidential authority that he rightfully would have had constitutionally the justification to leverage, but would not have yielded the long-term results. Also, to show humanity how we got here in the first place.
Yeah. Robert, let me do one follow up here
Yeah.
because it's interesting. Um, we were exposing virtually the same week that Putin went into Ukraine, the Ukraine Khazarian mafia connection. In fact, if anybody really looks at it, there's a billionaire named Zoyla Moisky that really financed this whole deal with Zelensky, which I think is Zelensky 2.0, but that's another story, and got him through this acting thing and into office. And the second Putin came into Ukraine, Zelensky took off to where I think the deep state hides, and that is Switzerland. That being said, so what happened is even under Elon, I was deleted on X. Under Truth Social, I couldn't put up a post about Ukraine's connection to the Khazarian mafia, and now we just did some investigation, and I'm now shadow banned on both still. So I believe we're making progress, but do you think it's rogue elements that are doing that, or do you think they're trying to maybe they don't want certain information to get out there? When I say they, the good guys.
You know, that's actually a really poignant question, and regretfully, I probably don't have the best of answers. My initial impression based on that, and I've seen a lot of that going on in recent weeks, is AI infiltration. President Trump recently said that AI probably is the most dangerous thing for humanity right now. And for the commander in chief to say that when he's fully aware of the types of things that Hillary Clinton and others have been doing on Epstein Island and Room 29, that's a very powerful statement to make. We know that the Obama administration was served a lawsuit by the Parsa Foundation, I think it was in 2020, discussing essentially their large scale criminality and complicity in crimes against humanity and AI in the central Chinese mainland, and with plans to export that model to most of the developed world, which of course they've been attempting to do for this transhumanistic agenda. So that being said, my first impression on any sort of infiltrate or any sort of disconnection in the internet space is being affected by AI somehow. But the other possibility that you mentioned, I think, is just as possible, is the fact that we do have elements of what we would call good guy command and control that are trying to pace this in such a way that kinetic operations can conclude first, and then we can introduce the narrative of how this happened in a way that is now inarguable for those legacy media adversaries that remain.
Yeah, and I think I have some anecdotal evidence of that. About I think it's almost 4 years now. Holy moly, time's flying fast. I got a call from somebody that is on the Trump team that said one of my documentaries were probably 3 to 4 years ahead of time. Don't worry about pushing it out just yet. At the time, I was like, oh, I was confused. This was all new to me, but now it makes a lot more sense. Robert, would you like to get into some of the questions that our wonderful Screwbig Gov, unpopular viewpoint, renegade media family? We say that because we SG are simulcasting, and we looks like we're going to be simulcasting probably on about 7 to 8 channels starting next week. So this is fun for us. Robert, do you have any? What questions do you have?
I wanted to just before we jump into the viewer questions, we just got done with Take Our Border Back convoy, and I wanted to ask SG on what his thoughts were on what's the reason, the real reason for having the border wide open. We've heard so many different things. Oh, they just want voters. Oh, they just want workers. Oh, maybe they're trying to build a militia. But SG, what's your take on it? Why are they wanting so eager to have these borders open? We've seen that. Is that really the game that they're after, or is there something else?
My friend, this is a really, really sensitive topic, and so I want to do it justice and
Okay.
highlight that some of this is going to be speculatory in nature because there is such a tight control of information regarding what's happening with these caravans, with the border. We just recently saw Tucker Carlson do an incredible expose with Dr. Brett Weinstein regarding what's occurring at the Darien Gap, what's occurring in Panama with different migrant camps that have been set up both for um, caravans that are fleeing economic collapse in the nations that they're coming from. And this collapse, of course, being induced by the Washington, D.C. based federal dollar central banking system and its collapse simultaneously in real time. But it's also being used to mask a greater component, which seems to be a Chinese infiltration of some kind here into the United States. So if I was, I guess let me back up a little bit here. If we're going to appreciate what could be occurring, we have to appreciate what has been happening. The CCP has been infiltrating the United States of America through bureaucratic means, diplomatic missions, various financial grants, certainly corporate ownership, theft of intellectual property, infiltration of the commercial sector, with a number of different, for example, restaurants linked to things like, espionage services for the CCP. And we've had evidence in recent years to show that it's been so vast and so complex that they've been able to operate their own law enforcement systems underneath our
Right.
noses within boroughs, within different areas of our metros. And so this idea of the border presenting an original or first time problem, I think, is maybe a little bit short sighted. This has been going on for about 40 years now.
Hmm.
However, it has always been at the behest of a combination of essentially cooperative elements within those entities that control the U.S. intelligence community, the Chinese intelligence community, a great deal of the Five Eyes intelligence communities, and the Israeli Mossad. And we have to remember that these groups have a vested interest in hiding the different technologies that they have acquired over the last 100 years or so. They have a vested interest in carrying out the willpower of their transnational globalist elite masters, who are oftentimes intermarried into this group of individuals that have these very high-ranking positions of power and influence. And so this community is going to have facilitated a lot of this over this 40-year period of time. And if you are and I'm going to take this in two parts, right? Because I think both possibilities are equally plausible. If you are the Chinese government seeking to overthrow the United States of America, this is the only way to do it, right? Infiltration, not invasion,
Right.
is the perfect tactic. It's truly the only tactic because you have an army of about 175 million gun of times who have had military service or law enforcement service of their own. They understand how to handle these types of situations, and so that is essentially, I think, an undefeatable army if it came down to it. So the idea that we could be repatriating or expatriating a great deal of the problematic assets that will forever destabilize other theaters of operation, other nation states around the rest of the world, and we're funneling them into the United States of America to handle them once and for all, despite the fact that it's very likely, I think, a certainty based on President Trump's recent statements about 100% likelihood that there is going to be some sort of critical national emergency that comes of this. I think that is the perfect way to get all of the rats into the trap, and they won't even know that they're there.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
interesting. I really appreciate the way you articulate things. I think it really helps our
yeah.
audience. So that's fantastic. In regards to this, so there's there's an interesting optic because you and I both agree, because I've heard you say it, that President Trump is actually commander in chief. That being the case, the obvious question would be to somebody is why would he, if he is CIC, allow this to happen? Now, I have a theory, but I definitely want to see what your feeling on that is.
This is going to sound a little bit elementary, but I think my theory on this, especially after going back and reading the particular Q drop that references the chain of command and then puts in parentheses the statement accepting 90+% in wartime. I think that my position on this is more like the position of the Kiefer Sutherland show, Designated Survivor. The commander in chief of the U.S. Armed Forces is the top acting officer of those forces and can implement different plans, right? But the execution of those plans, especially in continuity operations, may um, metamorph, if we can use the term transform, excuse me, is perhaps a better way to say it, how that chain of command has to operate, tailored specifically to the type of crisis and national emergency that has paralyzed the entire government. And Trump described it as worse than 9/11 and worse than Pearl Harbor. So we had a situation where a catastrophic emergency that had never been seen before, coming on all levels of society and co opting the American constitutional system, had actually happened. And so I believe a devolution continuity operation was implemented by the Trump administration between March of 2020 and January of 2021. But I believe in that process, while President Trump acted as the commander in chief of the armed forces, I believed he relinquished certain command authority when he stepped publicly out of the role, because that would be necessary to keep things in line with the constitutional record that we are currently writing in the legal space. Ever happening ever again. So I do believe that there is some knowledge that President Trump has, of course, of how things are going. I'm certain that the reason he keeps saying we will win and make America great again is because he knows something that he simply cannot say. But that being said, how much he knows about active decisions and current operations that are happening around the world, and what he's truly being read into, and read in on specifics of those types of operations, I think that's much less than we believe it to be initially.
Yeah, so I want to tell you my theory just to see if this resonates at all with you. And I'm really reaching out there. I have to be very upfront and authentic with everybody. So, but my background is most people know I've done a documentary, Cages, which is really dives into a Mexican cartel, which I believe is run by the American cartel, and a lot about the border. I've been down at the border, and I guess you would call it the communications consultant for the border convoy. So I have some knowledge in this, but at the same time, I like to put my Pollyanna rose colored glasses on for a second. And I've been watching this very, very, very closely, even though I'm exposing everybody coming over the border. And I tell people, I said, the high value prospects and targets are not coming all over the border, they're going under the border anyways. So we need to be very, very aware of that. That being said, is I was wondering what if there was any positive benefit to them being documented. Because here's the difference: before press documented, because they can collect a paycheck now and they can be housed. So now, more than ever before, they have an incentive, which will mean they can be tracked at all times, because if they want to get paid, you have to know where their address is. That's a little different dichotomy than we've seen in before, where they would avoid the border patrol. And when I was there, SG, there was 200 people that literally were sleeping on our side of the border for 3 days, waiting for the border patrol to pick them up when they easily could have moseyed down the road. And that's because I believe they want to be documented, because now they get services. I wonder if I know it's a long question, but is there an underlining, maybe a positive thing to the fact, maybe this is a game that's being played so we can actually document them?
I absolutely believe that's a very plausible theory, and the reason I think that is because of what Q said just one of the last, I think it was the last three or four drops. I think it was post 4960 where Q came out and said who activated the National Guard cybersecurity teams and why, and who gave the order to activate. Sort of tantalizing us out there, letting us know that there is a greater force at play here. And we know that NSA works through very, very advanced hacking capabilities, much of which was leaked through Edward Snowden. And we know that that's probably only 25% of the various capabilities that are actually deployed right now, things like XKey and Prism. So getting them documented also includes the incentive to get a smartphone. Most of these paychecks can't be accessed without some sort of smartphone access because everything that they do is digital, and they need a platform to interface with that digital medium. And yet, this platform also allows them to make phone calls. And every smartphone essentially acts as a geolocational tagging device when you look at the large scale surveillance operations that are made possible through offices like the National Security Administration, the DNI's office, and the authority that he has to initiate certain things. And then, of course, that needs to be tackled. And I imagine many of them will likely just drop their arms and surrender peacefully and quietly, rather than be massacred by a large scale military response. And those that do not do so, we can categorically show out to have been bad actors here on the behalf of some sort of other bad actor, wishing the American people and the Republic of the United States essentially existential harm.
Yeah, beautiful. And add to
Interesting.
that, they get debit cards too, so those are easily trackable.
Yeah.
Uh, Robert, I believe you have some questions.
I gotta find them. I gotta see where they are on here. But yes, we do have questions. Lisa. Oh, yeah, look at this here. Okay, I see them now. Questions for SG. SG, this is from the audience. What are your thoughts on Mike Gill, the Pandora Papers box whistleblower?
I have no particular thoughts about the man, specifically. I think that the evidence that he brings to the table is very, very important. Excuse me. It basically provides the template in a simple, small scale, a microcosmic jigsaw pattern to show the large scale pattern of money laundering that happens all around the planet. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
very important and crucial for people to understand. He highlights pretty relentlessly, based on the last things that I've heard from him, and it's been quite a while, but based on the things that I've heard from him, he highlights the DOJ's and the Justice Department's complicity in protecting much of that money laundering, and that co-opting really of the CIA and the intelligence community in the background, overlapping with that Justice Department, overlapping with DHS, controlling the different political campaign activities right down to the state and local levels, right? I think he highlighted out a couple of times on air that couple of different times when he was attempting to unseat I believe it was the governor of the state of New Hampshire. So, the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, I think these are excellent resources for people to get out and really, delve into and research if you're wanting to understand how shell companies, trust systems, tax havens, things of this nature are established and utilized in network format in a self-insular mode, to protect the money laundering havens, and the different areas in different key areas of the world that are known for extensive wealth generation. Things like the Cayman Islands, the country of Panama, the country of Ecuador, the state of New Hampshire, right? And I think that all of this ties into a much broader network, which gets us back to the central bankers. I think this is a great way to tie that corruption together for people to understand it in an intellectual level, but it comes back to the central banking organizations that have sort of superseded all of the governments since 1871.
Yeah. I've had conversations with Mike Gill and text messages back and forth, and I think his information is absolutely real. And I believe he was on the run. I believe when he lashed out at a bunch of people, including President Trump, I don't think that was because he thinks they're bad people. I believe that's because he's frustrated because he is on the run and the heat's on him, and he wants his information to be used quicker. But according to the plan, I'm just guessing it's just not ready for it yet. Let me make a correction too. In chat, they're saying this, and I thought I came out on this right away. So when the in 30 seconds, I debunked that as being the same Mike Gill. It's a different Mike Gill, guys. So if it's don't believe the hype, always open it up, read the article, spend some time so you don't get dragged down into the morass of we call it patriot mythology. Robert, what else do we have, sir?
Oh, I like this one because it's kind of my question too. What's the timeline on the financial crash and move into the new system? Have 401ks been safeguarded at all? This is a good one because SG, we've been hearing a lot about March being the time when we're going to expect a financial crash. What do you think?
You know, this is a difficult subject for me to speculate on, and I'm not a financial advisor just to go ahead and lead with that. But I think between the pressure on the petrodollar, the expansion of hostilities in the Middle East, the clear preparation of expansion for hostilities in the Pacific region, and probably here at home as well. And we have to consider too what happened the last time that we tried to convert the financial system, right? So a lot of this seems to be converging around about the same time. I think what is important to highlight is that April 1st has been traditionally treated, at least for the last 400 years or so, as the start of the new fiscal year worldwide, the start of the new accounting of trade, commerce, and value exchange with one another. So if anything significant is going to happen by the design of, say, good actors, it would be interesting to look at the symbolism leading up to or even right around that date. Another interesting date to maybe consider is the Ides of March, where Caesar was removed from power in Rome by the Roman Senate, right? So, but again, this is completely speculatory and speculative, excuse me. But it is to highlight the pattern of events that we're seeing. We have seen President Trump just in the last 7 days or so tell us that there will be 100%. That's his actual intelligence agency and the different intelligence communities that we
Thank you.
talked about earlier. President Trump has also told us that the U.S. economy is likely to crash this year, and that he wishes that it will prior to his term so that he doesn't have to be a Herbert Hoover. And we know that worldwide we've seen the dollar squeezed relentlessly out of various feeler markets and resource markets that have allowed it to prop itself up as a never ending supply of limitless lifeblood for this worldwide hydra. So as we choke that off more continuously, and then we're building to this penultimate event here at the United States of America within our own country, and we don't really know what that's going to look like, it makes a lot of sense that a financial event would coincide with some sort of national emergency or national crisis. And if that's not more on display right now in the public narrative, gentlemen, I can't tell you what is.
Yeah, that's so true. Now, SG, this is one of my most public failures. Is I actually I don't do many predictions because I don't believe in that, but I did predict that the market, based on all the markers I've studied historically, would crash September, October of 2022, not even 2023. And I failed miserably on that prediction. So I believe in failing forward. So I decided to do some research. And the only thing I can come up with, obviously we know it's manipulated, but the only thing I can come up with of why it sustained when normally it would have crashed with these markers I was looking at.
Slow walks America into what amounts to, I think, a pause of our society.
That's excellent. So, SG, we have got a ton of questions, and we're ranking right now super high on Rumble. Robert, I know you love when we're in the top 10. I think we're in the top three right now.
Awesome.
But I don't want to, out of respect for you, hold you too long. Do you have a time frame that you? I'm sure you have a pretty tight schedule.
I think I could make about 25 more minutes, gentlemen, if that's enough.
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds excellent.
More than enough. Next question for the audience. Has SG heard that all Air Force Reserve are on 24-hour call?
Yes, I have heard that. I've not been able to independently verify it, but I have seen a TikTok video to that effect. And in the video, the individual didn't seem to have any compunction to lie about it. It was someone that they were related to.
Interesting. Next one, we hear this question a lot. Do you believe JFK Jr. is still alive?
Yes, I do. Although I don't go as far as to speculate about his identity or what role he may play or
Right.
what role he is playing. But I do believe that the man is alive, and I think he's been absolutely crucial in helping iron out the worldwide nature of this coordinated operation. I think primarily in the background over the last 20 years, he's acted as an ambassador on behalf of patriotic forces here at home in the United States to coordinate the events that were launched under President Trump.
Yeah, my first film ever, I proved JFK Jr. is alive, not because I proved he was alive, but because I proved his wife was still alive with, facial overlays and so on and so forth. Ironically, that happened to be the video that I got a call on and said, "Hey, you're way too ahead of the game on this." So I don't know, but there's a lot of other aspects that went on in the video, but I would agree with you. I absolutely would agree with you. And that's not even a tinfoil hat moment, guys. I mean, the evidence really, really seems pretty tight on that.
It is
Next question.
amazing.
Okay. You want to continue, SG, or do you want the next question?
Well, the only thing I was going to add in closing on that question was that it is amazing when you look at the voice recognition um, comparisons that come out between newscasts that were launched that day in response to that crisis, the nature of the damage and the wreckage to the aircraft, later voices that appeared in videos that were released online, such as the Plan to Save the World. Um, it's very telling, and I think it tells a much broader picture about the espionage operation that we've used sort of as the backdrop for our discussion today.
Mm, yeah.
Fascinating. This is an interesting question. If you could telepathically say something to all 7.9 billion people on Earth right now, what would that be?
Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Because it is
Yeah.
only that way forward that we can administer the appropriate levels of justice that need to be administered in a dispassionate way that does not corrupt us spiritually through this awakening process and allows for us to move into a world that reflects what God always wanted it to be. And that is why we're here.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Awesome. Does space
Absolutely. And we've seen a number of different Space Force components highlighted in the purge operations that I referenced earlier with Mr. Johnson. And just recently, we saw a Space Force, I believe it was Space Force Systems Command, had a change in command to I believe, a Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on the rank. And Garrett's background began in the late 1990s at the National Security Administration. So this operation to gain control of the true numbers, if you will, of the election and how this happened. All of that was collected, I believe, by Cyber Command, NSA, Paul Nakasone, fed to Space Force as operational feeds, I think, for digestion and usage for broader military coordinated alliances, which have spawned off. But I think a number of different components of the digital fighting force within the U.S. military have the exact numbers on what occurred in not only 2020, but in the two election cycles prior.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, Sidney Powell, I think, was one of the first right after 2020 to bring up the fact that our election results were traveling overseas, and that was kind of shocking to hear that. But and then they squelched her. It's like they wouldn't let that information continue, and they started to discredit her when she was bringing that up. But I think you're right about that. I think the Space Force was involved and does have the information. Do you believe the deep state are still in control of the chemtrails?
So this is a very difficult question, and I think that we have to look at it through the actual kinetic changes that are occurring within high-level areas of military command. The soldiers are not allowed to question the orders that they're given, except in cases of flagrant unconscionability. And I don't think that you would get that cohesiveness within our fighting force in this day and time. If we appreciate that that's how that has to happen, then we must appreciate that some elements of military command are not working on behalf of we the people in any significant way. And indeed, we know that there are a number of different elements that have publicly pledged loyalty to the current Manchurian resident in chief, and they're not necessarily stooges that are being stood up to play a part. They are internal military industrial complex plants that are operating at the behest of the warlord complex, which controls our nations. And so, if those elements still exist, and to some degree that is great enough that we're still purging those elements and we're not fully secured in that process just yet, we have to remember that those elements are giving orders and that individuals below them are executing and carrying out those orders. And they may not be read in on what those orders entail in detail or what sort of activities in kinetic fashion those orders actually want to occur. They're just simply carrying out the directive that they are given. And so I believe it's absolutely possible that we have a mixture of white hat, black hat, if you want to call it that, good guy, bad guy, chemtrails that are going on around the United States right now. But I would caution everyone before they, have a very upset moment about the chemtrails. They have been going on for a very long time. I understand that it's a shocking realization to have to, see and experience every day, and you're sort of being reminded of this constant poisoning of the earth and the water and the air and all of us, and I understand that. But we do have the espionage of a lot of these chemtrails primarily being composed of various substances and materials that are extremely disruptive for targeting systems. And so, in that regard, it makes it much more difficult to launch a missile from abroad, achieve a hypersonic velocity, and land it accurately within the United States of America. And so, a lot of actors, I think, that could do something rogue like that around the rest of the world are not even attempting to, because if it spirals out of control, then so it's a razor's edge, right? We have to walk that razor's edge and appreciate that there is good and bad. God is using some things that are meant for our destruction, and is actually reverting that, I think, for our salvation. But in some regards, we have to remember that there is still problematic elements, as Q reminds us, right? White has secured many systems, but problems still remain, and we have to work through those systems and those problems.
Yeah, I believe you're probably also referring to high altitude aluminum oxide, which they use to target with the laser and it heats up the missile. I believe that's also the reason why recently, when I say recently, last few years, Russia and China readjusted what altitude they want their missiles to go, and they actually lowered it by, I think, at least 10,000 feet. You may have heard the same, which is a great indication of what you're saying, that we have the defenses up in the high altitude, and they couldn't penetrate that anymore.
Indeed, and I think when we appreciate the relationship that existed between President Putin and President Trump, and President Xi and President Trump, either one of these particular parties, I don't think would be the ones pulling any sort of lever in that regard. But I think that in the purging of these intelligence communities, and especially in the oligarchies that exist in the background pulling the strings of the Chinese Communist Party, and in the background pulling the strings of the Russian FSB and the Russian Duma, they're working around, I think, these elements and components, and having something that is capable in a defensive net fashion, but also provides disruption to the guidance systems themselves, is actually a huge.
That's very interesting. So I liken this Great Awakening opera, let's call it this Q operation, because that's what I believe it is, to, if you remember when Giuliani took down the Italian mob. What happened is Giuliani went in there with their teams. They did a lot of research ahead of time and pre-planning. They took down the first, second, sometimes the third tier of the mobsters. Where they really failed is the prediction of what the fourth and fifth tier of mobsters would do, because it was like anarchy. They would go a lot further than their previous bosses would, because they were vying for position. So they're like cockroaches scattering. It was a lot harder for them, and Giuliani and the team finally rounded them up and pretty much fixed that issue throughout New York. I believe we're looking at the exact same thing now. That the operations took down maybe the first and second tier. Now you have all these rogue actors vying for position. It's like, trying to stamp out cockroaches. It just seems like it's a monumental task. And I'm wondering why that could be also why things look so much more crazy, and it's almost virtual anarchy in some cases. It's only a theory I have, but I want to know what your thought process is on that.
I think if we look at their behavior, and especially the behavior of, say, the Hollywood elitist community and the different billionaires around the rest of the world, they are eating themselves. The desperation is palpable, and the panic is pretty plain. You see individuals coming out making incredible statements on Twitter, and then Tucker Carlson calls them, quote, effing lunatics. Um, this speaks to, I think, a much broader realization in the world, which is that the balance of power has somehow fundamentally shifted. That there is a fearfulness now that they have never felt before, because they've always maintained so much control before. And the poetry, I think, in all of this is that it is the Great Awakening that drives out that exposure all the more, right? It is the Great Awakening that brings them out into the light in a way that permanently removes their ability to affect any sort of change, any sort of narrative shift, any sort of consciousness swing, and any sort of kinetic activity in the world, and as a whole, and completely wipes out this Canaanite Phoenician blood practice that has been infecting the world's spiritual medium for a very long time. I find it absolutely incredible.
Yep, agreed.
Interesting. All right, next question up is, what are your thoughts on who will be the first public arrest and when, discounting a Trump arrest, which we've already had?
This is an entirely speculative answer that I have not been able to fully corroborate, because it's actually a topic that I'm researching right now. But I'm further and further coming to the idea that it's very likely we're going to see the first public arrest of a worldwide leader for crimes against humanity in the form of Bibi Netanyahu. And I think that that's going to happen at the hands of an Arabic coalition headed by Erdogan and what amounts to the return of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. In fact, I've gotten a lot of hate when we've Robert and I seem to be ahead of the curve, which I'm very proud of that when it comes to the Israeli Gaza conflict, because immediately the next day, everybody got their Israeli flags out, and I go, hey guys, just maybe take a breath for a second. I said, because we have to ask ourselves the question: how is it that the the best trained military in the world, which we know Israel has, the best air defense system in the world that they have, and I went so on and so on with it. How is and possibly with Mossad, the best intelligence agency. How is it possible that all these amateurs would have been able to penetrate their systems by flying over in paragliders and entering on the ground? Oh, and by the way, they moved their troops 48 hours from one point to another, and that happened to be the point that got breached. So all I said got a lot of hate. I'm suddenly an anti-Semite just for bringing up a little bit common sense.
Yep.
How is it possible that Israel got penetrated like that? I don't know. Maybe the deep state Netanyahu intentionally let it in, and I speculated that this was deep state against deep state, and the only thing they can grasp right now, only because it galvanizes people. Thought process on this?
My thought process on this is that the issue of what is actually at play within our governments in the world does not exempt or somehow bypass over Israel. As a matter of fact, if we look at the Mossad intelligence community, which is sort of the big brother of the CIA worldwide espionage and blackmail control operation that has occurred via weapon smuggling and pathogen development and things of that nature, we have to appreciate that that same intelligence community exists in Israel at an even greater level and to a greater degree, and actually has much more fiercely penetrated the operational forces of the Israeli Defense Force and the bureaucratic forces that exist in the Israeli government. So that's not reflective of the Israeli we the people by and large. As a matter of
Right.
fact, more than 1 million of them turned out in Tel Aviv just a couple of days ago to call for Netanyahu's resignation. This is
That's
the
right.
third such protest that exceeded 1 million in number just since the October 7th conflict began. The Israeli people know that Netanyahu staged a false flag. They know that their Mossad surveillance nets and their IDF border security measures would not fail to that degree and have never failed to that degree before. They're very well aware of what the Israeli military is capable of because these people brag about it all of the time through the news media servants that they control. So, looking at this process, you can only conclude that this is a false flag operation of some kind. And I challenge the viewers out there to look up things like the largest donor to the American Israeli Public Action Committee, which is the largest bipartisan political lobbying group that operates within the United States and brags that they have a greater attendance, a greater bipartisan attendance at their national address than the State of the Union. You have to go and look up the reason why Brian Kemp or you should go and look up the reason why Brian Kemp made state contractors in 2022 sign a pledge to never boycott the state of Israel. They could boycott Georgia, the state that was literally giving them the work, but they could not boycott the state of Israel worldwide. Go and research why a Jewish pornographer is heavily involved in donations to the American Israeli Public Action Committee. Go and research why Anthony Blinken went to Israel and the number of times that he has gone there just in the last 6 months, right? There is an infiltration present, and it's not just here at home, it's in the Israeli government as well, and it has usurped the Israeli we the people's will, just like the Manchurian administration here has usurped ours. And it is not acting on the best interests of American citizens or Israeli citizens or the people of Gaza. It is acting in its own interest.
Excellent.
Yeah, very true. SG, we're just going to do one more question because I know you have to run, and we want to wrap up here as well for the day. There's a really cool question here. When can we go to the store, the grocery store, and not have to worry about the chemicals and seed oils that are in our food?
I think that process is going to be much more organic at the civilian and we the people level. And the wonderful news about that is you are seeing very large scale and medium scale operate. I shouldn't say very large, but moderately large and medium scale operations that are popping up in different states around the USA and in different Western theater nations like France, for example, that are doing exactly this. Their entire focus for their existence is to produce consumables at the food and drink level that are not harmful, that are not laden with the various things that the commercial consumer giants that act as our our point of interface for what you would call the food market from the days of old have actually done with our food supply. How long that takes is really, I think, up to us. It could take as little as just a few years to get all of that pretty much under control. It could take even less time than that if you're willing to invest in your local community, say individuals that are growing vegetables out of a garden or raising animals or doing animal husbandry on a medium scale or a small scale and trying to get connected to the community. Bringing awareness as the digital army to that is another way to accelerate that quite tremendously. But it amounts to the overall, I think the overall amounting to, maybe is a better way to say this, of how we arrive at the point that this person is referencing, that has to flow along with the reformation of our government bureaucracy. A great deal of these institutions that exist in the U.S. federal government are simply outside of the Constitution. There is no authority for them to exist, and the authority that Congress delegated to them really is not delegatable when we examine Jefferson's writings. So we need to go back and really reclaim what authority we, the people, have at that government level, which is the process we're currently involved in now in a much more public and obvious way, and that will help accelerate this private sector growth and change as well.
And we've seen a lot of food processing plants go up in flames too. Is this part of the purging of some of these guys, do you think?
I think in some regards you can draw no other conclusion. It was amazing actually. I had a moment of synchronicity. It was either in late 2022 or early 2023 where I had put up something out on the social media discussing the composition of plastics that had been put into the genetically altered egg supply that was being produced by Eggland's Best. And within a week of that article going out on the socials, an Eggland's Best factory in Connecticut burned up with more than 100,000 genetically modified hens. So, looking at that, I can only conclude that something that was fundamentally not good for us went up in flames that day. And whether that was the deep state trying to get an insurance money claim or whether that was a broader operation seeking to disrupt poisonous food supply, I'm not sure that the instigating event really matters because the end result is that a consumed by millions of Americans was no longer in the system.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and this is just anecdotal. And I think my wife actually disagrees with me on this because she studies food and the poisonings a lot, and she doesn't have a positive outlook right now. Although with the Truth Tour, we traveled to 77 cities in 17 months, and I saw, and so did a lot of people that were traveling with us, this really weird difference in the quality of food in fast food. Because unfortunately, when you're on tour, you have to delve into fast food, which I'd rather not. But, anyways, we saw the difference in quality from years ago to now, where it seemed to be actually a lot better. The chicken was more flavorful. It looked like real chicken they were using, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if this could have been one of the first things that the good guys maybe attacked in the background. Would be nice because when my wife and I travel worldwide, we can definitely tell you though the food is better in other countries just because of what they outlaw there. Do you think there's any credence? Maybe they dove into it secretly and fixed a lot of stuff because it sure seemed to even taste better.
Legitimately, and I'm gonna kind of pivot off of the anecdotal evidence there, but I think it sort of speaks for itself in some regards. Food and the food supply has been the number one vector by which Bill Gates has been seeking to poison the entire world. Right? We'd like to think that it's
Mhm.
through modern healthcare. It's really through the food. The Russian army here are moving forward, so this is a very good indicator. And albeit it is anecdotal, but it's a very good indicator to sort of back up the theory that Mr. Herms was just putting forward.
Yeah, interesting. On that note, Robert, how we doing?
We're doing well. I just want to let everyone know if they want to follow SG Anon, real Q, real SG Anon on Truth Social, right? It is Q News Patriot on Rumble. Follow that channel, Q News Patriot on Rumble for all our Rumble followers. And SG, you're now on X as well. The real Q News Patriot, right?
Correct. The X handle is the THEQ News Patriot with a blue check mark, and I can be found on Rumble and Truth Social as well.
Beautiful.
Outstanding.
Any final words for our audience?
Keep your head up. 2024 is going to be a fun time for those very awake Anons and those hardened awakened patriots that have been fighting the good fight, excuse me, and have been rubbing their faces against that cement wall that is the MK Ultra that is present over their friends, family, and loved ones. But be of good cheer, because as we go through this process to fully destabilize, excuse me, and pause the deep state worldwide power structure and bring about its exposure and its inevitable end, I think we're going to get. I think it's going to be a very fun and spiritually exciting experience, and some of that may be a little bit tough, and some of that may not be a little bit tough. But either way, we win, and keep the faith on that, because as we move forward, we can only pin them further and further against the wall. They could not be more afraid. We've never seen the royal families abdicating at the rate that they're abdicating now. We've never seen individuals trying to distance themselves from banks. We've never seen billionaires building bunkers, right? They're building bunkers for the people because they know what is going to come. And so keep the faith, stay encouraged. God wins, and so do we.
Absolutely beautiful.
SG, thank you so much. We're blessed to have you here, and we'd love to do this again at some point.
God bless, gentlemen. An honor. I'd love to come back. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you. Wow. Really good. Really good. Really good.
Excellent. Excellent.
Ha.
And to our admins, real quick before we sign off, they've done a phenomenal job today keeping the chat clean.
Yeah.
We really appreciate that. And just to give a real quick plug, because with all my travels, I should be really sick by now. And I will say that this product, Neumi, has done a phenomenal job for me. Yes, you can see how dark my hair is. That's because of the glutathione. So you can look into it. I don't know if there's a link below. I don't even care if you use somebody else's link and they can get commission on it. All I know is I'd love to see people use this product because it is a life changer from what I've seen. Oh, but you did put my link there anyways. Thank you very much, Lisa. I just love it. I love it so much.
And we're back. All right. Lewis, that was a great interview. Thank you for your help and assistance in making this happen. SG did a really wonderful job and really took things to a whole new level. And my head is still spinning. I got to go back and listen to that one again. I don't think I caught it all because my head was going, what's going on here? But really, really great information.
Yep. And tomorrow, guys, we have the news, obviously, SBG News and Views at the same bat time, same bat channel. We have some very interesting information coming out of Arizona you're going to want to see. We're going to give an update on Tina Peters, and then we have an expose of Taylor Swift in the Super Bowl that may just knock your socks off. So you want to be there tomorrow. And Thursday, we're working on a very special, I guess you would call it roundtable. So a lot of fun we're having lately, guys. And then, of course, rememberyouroath.com. Go to rememberyouroath.com. This is how you can fight back. And it costs, how much, Robert, does it cost? Nothing. So go to rememberyouroath.com and you're going to learn how to fight back. And our app will be out soon where all of you can connect together because the micro fixes the macro. Good night.